Tuesday morning after that big storm cycle. We were unsure of how many folks might be joining today just because there's a variety of folks that are out of power and internet. So really encouraged by the 77 participants that have joined us already. And so my name is Ken Fetcho. I'm the Effectiveness Monitoring Coordinator. And this is our online training on our monitoring grants, administrative rules, and online application. Joining me is Liz Redon, our Region 3 program rep. And we're going to do introductions with the various Oweb staff that are on the call today. But before we do that, we wanted just to walk you guys through a couple tips on using Zoom. So I'm going to turn it over to Liz.
All right, great. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Like Ken said, it's been a little bit uncertain trying to get everything booted up and power and internet. So I'm going to give you a few tips and tricks. I'm going to look at Ken and see how my audio connection is right now. Is it good? All right. So as you can look around the screen, we just have a few helpful hints for using Zoom. One is because we do know a lot of people might be having some internet connection. It is helpful to turn off your video as a first step to help with your connection. You can do that by going down to that camera in the lower left-hand corner and then clicking that up arrow, and it'll give you options, or if you just click on it, it should turn on and off your camera. Another option is you can switch to phone. And the way to do that is if you click that little arrow right next to the microphone, it will give you some steps to switch over to a phone connection. And sometimes that helps if you switch to phone, and then you can just watch the video separately on your computer. If you are on phone and would like to raise your hand, and we'll talk about asking questions later, but this is for phone users. If you would like to raise your hand, which makes it easier for us to see you when you have a question, you can push *9 on your phone, and then it will show us on your tile on Zoom that you have a question, and we can call on you at that point. There are going to be points in the session where we will be having questions, and so we are asking folks to either use the chat function, and we have several people that will help us monitor that, or you can raise your hand. And so the way you use that chat function is that yellow circle area. Just go ahead and click on that, and they'll bring up a box that will allow you to enter your question into that box. And then also, if you want to raise your hand, just click on that participants that which circled in red there, and you can go up to a little blue hand and raise your hand there. Just also of note, we are recording the session so that we can provide it to others for folks to look at it later. So keep that in mind. And also anything that is on the Zoom recorded and also in chat session, just so you know, is public record. So just keep that in mind when using those different functions. With that, I'll turn it back to Ken.
Thanks, Liz. So yeah, there'll be a couple spots where I'll stop to ask if you have any questions. But if you have, any questions on the specific content I just covered, just type it into the chat, and then Liz will be watching that and can pause me to quickly answer any questions, or we might just hold those to sort of the discussion at some key points. At the very end, after I walk us through the online application, we'll also have opportunity for Q&A more focused on the application and any questions that might be related to your project. And again, we have some Oweb staff here on the call today to participate in those discussions as well. So what I thought I'd do is just pull this. This is our Oweb regional map. As most of you know, we divide the state into 6 regions, and we have a program representative for each region. And they have updated contact information on there now. Some of us just recently got new phone numbers, and so wanted to go through the regions to give Oweb staff an opportunity to introduce themselves. So I thought I'd start with Region 1 and go through Region 6. And I see Katie turned on her camera. So Katie, would you mind introducing yourself, please?
Hi, good morning, everybody. So I'm Katie Duzick, as Ken mentioned, and I cover the North Coast, which is from Scappoose Bay all the way down the coast to the Coastal Lakes watershed, which is just south of Florence. Thanks.
Thanks, Katie. And I wasn't sure if Mark, if you're on, but Region 2, if you could introduce yourself.
Sure, Ken. Mark Grenbemmer, I'm the Region 2 program rep located in Southwest Oregon. Counties I cover are Douglas, Jackson, Josephine, Coos, and Curry, and great to see the turnout today.
Thanks. Liz, do you want to go ahead and maybe just
Sure.
describe your region?
Yeah, hi again, Liz Redon, and I'm the Regional Program Representative covering the Willamette Valley Basin, Region 3.
Greg, are you on for Region 4?
I am. Hi, folks. Greg Cianella. I'm the Region 4 Regional Program Representative. I cover the central sliver of the state. And the counties I cover are Wasco, Hood River, Jefferson, Crook, Deschutes, Klamath, and Lake. Thank you.
Thanks, Greg. And Kobe, I see you have your camera on. Would you mind introducing yourself, please?
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Kobe Menton here. I'm Regional Program Representative in Region 5, the East Region. And the counties I cover are Baker, Union, Wallowa, Malheur, and Harney counties. Good to see everybody.
Thanks, Kobe. And then last but not least, Sue Greer for Region 6.
Thanks, Ken. So I cover Region 6, which is the north central part of the state, and I cover Sherman, Gillum, Morrow, Umatilla, Wheeler, and Grant County. And it's great to see everybody signed on.
Yeah, it really is. Thanks, everybody. And so, yeah, it's important to have our PRs here today, and again, put their contact information in case you're interested in completing a monitoring application. We'll talk a little bit about that, but we're available to have pre-application consultation calls before you submit the application, and we can help you scope your project and answer any specific questions you have for your project. You can also schedule those consultation calls by just contacting me. My contact information is there as well on the right-hand side of the screen. And then, of course, Andrew Dutterer is our partnership coordinator. He's responsible for all the focus investment partnerships. And he's a great contact if you're involved in a FIP and developing an application. Unfortunately, Andrew is in Salem today and without power, and he let me know that he's unable to join. So just wanted to point out his contact information there as well. So today, here's some things that we'd like to cover. Really, want to talk about the rulemaking process and the changes to the monitoring program administrative rules that were made when the board approved the rules in April of 2020. Kind of get into great detail a little bit on the purpose, eligibility, and evaluation criteria. And then highlight some of the application revisions that were made so that we can apply the new criteria. And then after this short PowerPoint presentation, we'll walk through the online grant application. So I'll log into the what we call the UGA, the Oweb online grant application, and sort of walk you through all the various questions, highlight some of those changes, and then really highlight some of the key guidance and give you some advice on how best to answer those questions. And as I said, we'll have a few question and answer sessions throughout the day. So with that, I'm going to now talk to you about how the process we went through to revise our monitoring grant program rules. So beginning in April of 2019, the board authorized us to initiate rulemaking. And in August, we formed a Rules Advisory Committee, or RAC, and we held 4 meetings between August and December of 2019. And we had a great RAC. They're super engaged, and there were people who participated, were really familiar with our monitoring grant program. We had 13 members representing a variety of agencies, geographic areas in which they work, technical expertise, and roles in which they interact with our monitoring grant program. So we had review team members, and we had grantees. And we also had 2 tribes that participated. So we had Stan Vanderwettering from the Confederate Tribes of Siletz Indians. We had Amy Charette from the Confederate Tribes of Warm Springs. Both of those folks that work for tribes also sit on our regional review teams. And Amy also participates in the John Day Basin FIP, or Focus Investment Partnership. We had 2 board members that sort of participated as ex officio members. So we had Alan Henning, who represents EPA, and we had Molly Kyle, who represents DEQ, participate, and then had Eric Hartstein, who is our senior policy specialist, who helps all staff that go through rulemaking, and then my supervisor, Deputy Director Renee Davis, assisted as well. And so we had, as I said, sort of these 4 meetings. We also had a lot of exchanges with them. So we'd send out drafts after we got feedback from them, and they'd give us written comments. We had this sort of back and forth over 5 months to create our draft rules that then went out to public comment. But we also incorporated the Department of Justice, who are our legal team, who provided review twice before and once after public comment. February 1st of 2020, the rules were released for public comment, and that was a 30-day comment period, and we got quite a few written comments, and we held a public hearing in Salem and had 1 individual provide public comment at that meeting. And we really took that public comment to heart, and we made quite a few edits after the public comment period was complete, and then that went to DOJ again for review before it went to the board. The Oweb board made some minor edits and 1 significant addition before they approved the rules at their Oweb board meeting on April 21st, 2020. So here's just a slide just showing a summary of those changes. And because the rules that we had been using prior to this were last revised in 2005, there was substantial changes that were made. And the new format we adopted was based on other more current administrative rules. So we sort of just updated the rules with the current formatting and added some new sections. We added a purpose statement. We added 8 new definitions. We removed the application requirements because that section's already covered in Oweb's general grant program language or rules. We expanded significantly the evaluation criteria. We have 10 total now, and we included a description of the technical review process that we follow. So this is just a slide showing a visual representation of our old rules using what we call a bubble diagram. And this is the next slide showing what the new rules look like in the current monitoring bubble diagram. And so this is just shown to you as just a visual representation so you can see how much they've changed. And I'll pause here. I'll ask Liz to maybe just briefly describe the bubble diagram. We're going to show this again later on when we go to Q&A, but just thought I'd briefly pause to have Liz explain how we can use this as a tool for both our applicants and our review team members.
Great. So yeah, many of you have probably seen the bubble diagrams because we do tend to send them out as much as possible, but they are really meant to be a tool to help translate the language of administrative rule into a diagram, as Ken described earlier, so that we can more actively use them. And so one way that we encourage applicants to use the bubble diagrams is to take a look at what the criteria in the boxes and make sure that you're answering those questions or those criteria as you're answering the questions in the application, because this is what the review team is looking at when they're reviewing applications. Is we provide the bubble diagrams to the review team, and we bring them up during the meetings and reference them often through the meetings and ask questions around each of those criteria. So the more that information is easy to find in the application, the easier it is for the review teams to interpret it and be able to pull out the key points that they are supposed to be using to evaluate project applications.
Thanks, Liz. So again, I was just showing that to you. This is the only opportunity to see what our new criteria is and our purpose and eligibility statements, but I just wanted to again show you just sort of visually how much they've changed from our old rules to our current ones. And again, these rules were last updated in 2005, so we really did quite a bit of updating, and sort of the reason why we're highlighting them today during our training. But if you do want to access our rules, I wanted to show you how you can do that. All of our administrative rules are available on our website. They're sort of organized by the grant program. And so this is our homepage. So that was just a link to our homepage for those of you who are familiar with this. And then if you go down to grant programs, you can click on monitoring grants. And this page does have quite a few resources available that provide just an overview and eligibility. And this language is based on the new rules here. And these are the 4 types of monitoring activities that can be proposed in our online application. Description of the review and award process, and then how to access the online application. Here's some additional resources that we've highlighted. I'll mention one later in the training. And then also down here are our rules. So you just click on this. And this takes you to our the Oregon Secretary of State website. It has all of our administrative rules. And so it has them for verbatim. You can download them or read them. And so I just wanted to describe how you can access them. So let's see here. All right. So the first section of the rules are a purpose statement. And that's something new that we added. And really, it links back to the overall intent of Oweb funding. And so there's language in the Oregon Constitution and revised statutes that basically states that Oweb may consider grant applications that propose monitoring activities necessary for carrying out projects that either protect or restore native fish or wildlife habitats, or protect or restore natural watershed or ecosystem functions in order to improve water quality or stream flows. And so, as you guys are aware, there's also stakeholder engagement and technical assistance grant opportunities, and all those sort of must have a connection to either protecting or restoring native fish or wildlife habitats, and natural watershed or ecosystem functions in order to improve water quality or stream flows. So the same thing is for monitoring grant programs, grant applications. Basically, they have to have a link to those overall goals, which is the intent of Oweb's grant program. So after we added the purpose statement, we included an eligibility section. And so again, this is sort of paraphrased, so you can see the exact language in the rules, but basically we'll only consider applications that gather and analyze data to describe current watershed conditions and or establish trends about watershed conditions and or evaluate the specific effects of a restoration or acquisition project or program. And all 3 of those sort of efforts must make monitoring results publicly available. Something that we also worked on was we developed an ineligibility statement, and basically projects that will not inform the development of restoration or acquisition projects or programs and have the sole purpose of theory testing, evaluation of experimental designs, or the production of generalizable knowledge are ineligible. And so I really, for emphasis, I bolded out sole purpose to help emphasize that statement. For folks that are familiar with our programs, you guys know that we're unable to fund research. And so instead of defining research and monitoring in our rules, we thought it was best to describe what's eligible and ineligible. And so again, that's the value of having pre-application consultation calls with Oweb staff to help make sure your project's eligible before it's submitted. It's a lot of hard work to complete an application, and we want to make sure before you do that, we consider your project eligible.
So Ken, we do have a hand raised by Neil. Did you want to take a brief moment to answer a question? And if it's related, go ahead, and Neil, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Thank you, and I didn't mean to interrupt the flow now. I just wanted to kind of flag it, and we can answer it later if we need to. In the evaluation of the impact, if it's on a previous slide, I'm not catching the exact language. In the evaluation of the impact of a restoration project, obviously the best time to start that evaluation is before the project occurs. So I wanted to find out if monitoring grants would be considered eligible if we started the monitoring, even though the project has not hit the ground yet.
Yeah, no, great. That's a great question, Neil. And thanks. And I think this is a good example of when it's a good place to stop me. So thanks for saying that. And yeah, we do allow a collection of baseline data, before a restoration project is implemented. And so we have some questions in the online application that help us better understand sort of where you are in that phase of monitoring planning. And so you're able to describe that to help the review teams understand where you are. And I'll show, as I go through the application, I'll make sure to point that out. Liz, I'll just keep going unless there's anything else that pops up.
I don't see anything right now.
Okay, thank you. So the next slide here I have, and I had to split it into two, the evaluation criteria, there's 10 total. And each one, I thought it was important for folks to see these because, after the rules were approved by the board, I soon realized that there's some changes that we have to make to the application so we can apply the criteria. And each of these criteria, there's almost multiple criteria within them. And, that's what happens when you have a very motivated and thoughtful RAC, is you come up with lots of evaluation criteria. We did our best to pack them into succinct rules and not have too many, but we did end up with 10. And so I wanted to describe each one of them. And then as we go through the application, you can kind of see how each question links to our criteria. Sometimes we have to have multiple questions in an application to get to one criteria, and sometimes we can just accomplish that with one question. So the first one really is around the need, so the need, relevance, applicability, and timeliness of the proposed monitoring project to inform future planning, implementation, or adaptive management of restoration or acquisition projects. And we actually were able to remove a question too. So not only do we add questions, we removed the question from the application to make that more succinct and hopefully avoid some repetition in the application. Second criteria, monitoring or information needs related to limiting factors, habitat conditions, watershed processes, or actions described in existing plans, or that would inform the development of a future plan or assessment. Number three, really understanding how, again, I underlined that statement at the top, to the extent to which the proposed project clearly addresses existing data, including historical data and indigenous knowledge, or current or planned monitoring efforts that this project will complement. And so that's one of the areas here that our board felt it was really important to add was these two words, Indigenous knowledge, which is also known as traditional ecological knowledge, or TEK. And that was our board member felt strongly that should be included, that it's not always sort of scientific data that a proposed project could complement and or could be incorporated into. And we have some language, some guidance language in our online application that describes that. But what's also included that is current or planned monitoring efforts that this project will complement. Often review team members will state, well, are they working with so-and-so? Because so-and-so is doing something really similar in that same area. And we want to make sure it's coordinated and not in isolation. So number 4, the monitoring questions and how the proposed monitoring methods and activities, including study design, data collection, and management and analysis procedures, will answer these questions. And so the RAC really felt strongly that we should center these rules around what's the applicant's monitoring question, and then everything that they propose later on, how does that help link back to them answering their question? And so that's something that's new. We still have it, goals and objectives, but then we also include asking the applicant what their question is. And I think that's important, but also can help the applicant further scope and refine their project as it's being developed. Number 5, the extent to which the proposed project clearly addresses professionally accepted monitoring and analysis protocols, including quality assurance, quality control procedures to be utilized. There's a few questions that we have in the application that address both of those. So now this is the second half of our criteria. Number 6, proposed costs that are appropriate for the work necessary to accomplish the objectives. And that's really important because we really want to make sure folks who are applying for Oweb monitoring funds that their budget covers everything from collecting the data, but also managing, analyzing, and reporting the data. Often applicants' budgets are really focused on collecting the data, but give little detail in the schedule and further activities around data management, analysis, and reporting. Oweb does require that final technical report be completed for monitoring grants. And so we want to make sure that we have criteria around those proposed costs are appropriate to accomplish the objectives. So number 7, that really is around, the 7 and 8 are really around, the ability, the experience of not only the applicant and the grantee, but also the team that they put together to complete the monitoring project. So number 7, the organizational capacity of the applicant as it relates to past experience and successful implementation of monitoring projects relative to the proposed monitoring activities. Number 8, the qualifications, ability, and performance history of the technical staff of the applicant, consultants to be retained, or project partners to apply appropriate monitoring approaches and the proposed data collection and analysis methods in a manner that will successfully complete the monitoring activities. And the REC really felt strongly that we include, again, as I mentioned before, data collection and analysis methods in a manner that will successfully complete the monitoring activities. So it really is giving applicants the opportunity to describe their team and how those different folks and have that experience to complete the project from data collection all the way to completing the report and making it available. Number 9, how the appropriate technical experts and community stakeholders are engaged. And so we have a new question that's focused on that. And the really idea there is that I think making sure that the folks that you've reached out to in your community, to make sure folks are interested in this data that you propose to collect, and describing how that information can be used. And then finally, number 10, the process by which data results will be stored, reported, and made publicly available. As I'm sure all of you understand, this is public dollars being used, and so we want to make sure that this information is made publicly available. We'll talk a little bit later on how that can be done, some examples. And so this slide, I'm not going to go through it in great detail, but it just shows that there is numerous changes that had to be made to the online application to either add some questions, slightly reword existing questions, but also to improve the guidance for helping applicants provide the information for each question to help us apply this new criteria. Some of those revisions were also just made based off our experience reviewing applications in the past and seeing how people were answering questions to try to provide some guidance to help applicants improve their responses as well. So here's just a slide real quick, just describe some resources that are available. I've hit most of them, but just want to emphasize that, you know, we have resources for applicants and review team members. I'll show you a little bit. We have just this standalone Word document that's guidance on how to answer the different applications, including monitoring. There's a chapter for monitoring. And then there's these I buttons that are embedded in that online application that has tips on how to answer the questions. Again, that red language there is just encouraging folks, if you're interested in applying for a monitoring grant, please reach out to myself or the RPR in your region to schedule a call to have another discussion on that. And there's also, as I was showing earlier, the OPM team members, Oregon Plan Monitoring team members, are available as a resource as well to contact. Their contact information is in our monitoring website that I showed earlier. And there's also there, if your project has an element of water quality monitoring, there are some unique reporting requirements where data needs to be submitted to DEQ. And in order to do that, they require that a sampling analysis plan be developed and approved by DEQ. We have 2 years ago, I partnered with DEQ on a webinar, and that's been recorded. That's available on our website as well. And so if you haven't seen that, I encourage you to watch that when you have time. And then our review team members, we have different tools. We have that revised bubble diagram that has been developed. And then we also have a review worksheet that can help our review team members apply the new criteria and identify strengths and concerns before making their recommendations. And so I thought it'd be important to describe what the monitoring application review process and timeline looks like. Just a reminder that for the current open solicitation offering, applications are due April 26th at 5 p.m. and our board will make funding decisions at their October board meeting. So it pretty much kicks us off for, you know, a 6-month review process. And so about a month after the deadline, the Oregon Plan Monitoring team reviews all the monitoring applications that are received. And this is a unique process in the sense that monitoring applications are reviewed by 2 teams. The Oregon Plan Monitoring team is composed of statewide monitoring experts from the following state natural resource agencies. So we have folks from Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, Department of Ag, Department of Forestry, Water Resources, DEQ, and Oweb. Basically statewide monitoring experts that review these monitoring applications on the basis of technical merit, but also the value of information produced. The regional review team members that also review the applications tend to work more locally, and so this is helpful for folks that work across the state to provide feedback on the value and the technical merit of these applications. And so they may be recommendations that OPMT makes, but they're more on how the application could be improved, if applicable, and other pertinent items to be mindful of. The regional review teams are the ones that actually make funding decisions or recommendations. And I was going to turn it over to Liz to explain the rest of the information on this slide to describe our review and funding decision.
Thanks, Ken. So after the OPMT meets and provides feedback, that information goes to the regional review teams. And there are 6 regional review teams. They are in each of the regions that you saw on the map at the beginning of the presentation. And basically those teams are made up of expertise from those regions, as Ken said. They are folks from those regions with expertise of the watersheds in those regions. And they're usually from state and federal agencies, tribes, and universities. And it's not just about who they work for, but rather what do they know. So we try to make sure that there are folks on those review teams that have all the expertise for that region, from the habitats to the hydrology and so on. And so we asked them to take a look at every application and also consider the OPMT feedback from their review. And we again use those bubble diagrams, the evaluation criteria, and worksheets, so thank you, Ken, that Ken is showing right now. And these are the tools that we use to help them provide a consistent review of each application. And we ask them to identify the strengths and concerns that they see in a project application. And what we're, that conversation where we're driving to is getting to the, do you see enough evidence or indicators that the project is likely to succeed, which is that sweet spot in the middle, based on the evaluation criteria that we have in administrative rule. And if you do see that likelihood of success, then the review team, we ask them, would you recommend that project for funding? And so that is a recommendation. It's not a funding decision at that point. So the review teams provide a recommendation to Oweb staff about the projects, and then the Oweb staff are making a recommendation to the board. And the board is the one that actually makes the award decision on projects. But the review team, again, there's 2 parts to their recommendation. It's the, would you recommend it for funding? And then because we never have enough funding for every project that is recommended, we ask them to rank the projects in priority, so that gives guidance to Oweb staff what projects should be funded first, to the extent that we can for the funding that is available to us. And I do see there's a couple of questions in the chat box related to this particular conversation. So I just wanted to reiterate, one of the questions is, how consistent would you say the evaluation criteria is when review team are scoring and ranking applications? And I would just highlight that that's why we have those evaluation worksheets in the bubble diagram, is to help create that consistent review across review teams and across applications, because they're directly linked to the evaluation criteria and rule. And so that's what we're always, why we bring those up a lot, and people might get a little tired of us bringing it up a lot, but those are the criteria in administrative rule. And so that's how we make sure that review teams are consistently using it, is by using those tools. Another related question I see is, what is a reasonable time frame to contact and get helpful responses from Oweb support when completing an application? That's a great question. So right now is a really good time to be contacting your Oweb staff if you're considering to an application for the solicitation that's due in April. Generally, we do send out an announcement through our Gov delivery about 3 months prior to a deadline. So as soon as you see that Gov delivery announcement coming up saying that there are applications that are open and you are able to go in and apply, that's a good time to start contacting Oweb staff. And we're always happy to help you out, brainstorm, and also just review applications to give some feedback on them. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Ken.
Great, thanks, Liz. And so do you want to, maybe I'll go back on the slide just really quick, just to hit funding lines and then the board decision, if that's okay?
Yeah, sure. So the funding lines, that's referring to when I was saying what we asked the review teams to rank projects. So first step is they review it and determine that likelihood of success and whether they would recommend it for funding. And then the second is that ranking. The ranking gives us a list that we then draw a funding line. So the board is the one that decides how much money we can spend. So they create a spending plan to inform staff. This is how much money we are allotting to monitoring applications each biennium or each cycle. And then we have to take that and we know how much we can spend, and we look at that rank list in each of the regions, and we go down until we hit around that spot where we've run out of money, essentially. And so that becomes your funding line. So anything above that line is what gets recommended for funding to the board for award. Anything below is recommended because it's technically sound and likely to succeed, but we ran out of money because our spending plan only has so much funds for each project type. And then, and again, just highlight that for this current cycle, the board decision is in October 2021. And then
Great.
Ken, before we move away from rules, I did want to let you know there was a question in chat about just getting more detail about ways Oweb wants data to be made publicly available. You also mentioned that you'd be digging into that a little bit more. So I don't know if you
Yeah,
want to touch on that now or wait till later, but just note that that's something that some folks are interested in hearing about.
thank you. Yeah, and just quickly, it's a great question. I will talk in more detail later, but one of the things that's important to note is that if you're collecting water quality data, that is required to be reported to DEQ, and they'll store that data in their database, which is called Aquams, and that data can be uploaded to EPA's Water Quality Exchange or Central Storage House, which is called Nrda. And so for water quality data, we do require that data be submitted to DEQ and provide confirmation that that was done to close a grant out. And then if it is fish or wildlife and or habitat data, we do require that that be submitted to ODF&W on their NRIMP clearinghouse. Certain other types of data, we can talk about that right now. We don't have a way in which like streamflow data, if it's collected by a grantee, to be submitted to the state of Oregon, but there are different ways you can make that available on your website. As I said before, we do require all of our monitoring grantees to complete sort of a standalone technical report that describes their monitoring project and report their data and describe and discuss those results, and then answer your monitoring questions. And so we do put that in our database, our granting database called Ogmas. It's required to be uploaded there, but there's other ways you can make that information available. And so we want to hear on how you plan to do that. And I'll give some examples later on in the training. But really,
And then we have another.
Go ahead. Yeah.
So we have another related question for this moment is there any opportunity for retroactive funding of baseline monitoring done prior to an application/grant award?
I guess I'm not really understanding the question. And Liz, if you are, then maybe you could help.
My understanding, and Amy, feel free if I am misunderstanding this, is basically if you've collected baseline data prior to getting a grant or maybe even having a grant opportunity, is there a way to get reimbursed for that data if it's baseline for data for the current project that they are applying to?
No, I don't think so, but that can be used as match for a project that you are might be proposing, say, to do post restoration. And so sometimes match is matching funds. Oweb requires 25% match of the Oweb amount that you request. And so sometimes, as we all know, it's hard to find funds for monitoring programs. And so any data that you collect before you submit an application to Oweb, that can be used for match, but has some strings attached to it. You can't have already used it as match. It can't be Oweb funds, and it has to directly relate to the project that you've proposed. And Liz, maybe I'll look to you to see if there's anything you want to add or clarify.
Nope.
Okay.
You answered that perfectly.
Okay. So I'll just pause here. There's an opportunity to ask any questions about what we just covered. Again, I'm going to switch over to the online application now to walk through that and provide a lot more detail on specific information related to proposing a project for monitoring.
All right, we have a couple of questions to come in. What is the timeline for spending? Is it a biennium So 2 years of monitoring. So that's basically how long is funding available for a project?
Yeah. So though that is, folks typically request funds for 1 to 5 years for monitoring grants. It doesn't have to be a 2-year focus on our spending plan, because of the way our fiscal administration sort of budget. And so what we really encourage folks to think about is, what is a reasonable amount of time to complete the project based on your monitoring questions, understanding that some of this stuff, say for, tracking changes associated with restoration, some of those take many years. But what's reasonable for you to get your project started, and sort of break up the project into maybe phases, or just think about how you can begin to collect data or continue to collect data over time. And so we do not have really set times or a maximum lengths, but we do ask, because lottery funds and some of our federal funds need to be spent within 5 to 6 years. And so you start getting beyond that time period, it's a little more tricky for us to fund these projects over time.
And then another match related question that came in through chat, if some of the compatible monitoring data that we plan to integrate into our analysis is done via Nrda project, can these funds be used as match?
Yeah, I think so. Again, as long as you're not committing those to other project as match, you can only use match once. And as long as it's related to the project. And again, Liz, you're seeing these in writing. So if I'm answering these wrong, just based on what I hear, please help me out.
No, you're doing good. Yeah, so I think one thing to think about is when you are starting to consider using match that predates the grant or the project, one of the things that we will ask in our scrutiny of that match is that match directly related to achieving the goals and objectives of the project you're proposing? So while you can use a match from that predates that project, it does have a little bit more scrutiny to make sure that it's directly related to the project goals and objectives. So it's really important to make that clear in your application that you're not using just any match, but it is directly related to the goals and objectives of the proposed work. Oweb is unique in that we don't require match to be concurrent to an open grant. So we do just have to be careful to make sure that it's relevant.
So I'm going to move us along.
Yeah.
We got quite a bit to cover. We got about 1 hour and 8 minutes left. I want to be respectful of everybody's time. And so if there's others there that came across, let me know. But I'm going to kind of move us along, and we might have opportunity to answer those later.
Yeah, I'm not seeing new questions at this point, Ken. So I'll keep monitoring.
Perfect. And those are all great questions, you guys. So keep them coming. And again, Liz can kind of keep track of them. As I go through this, if you have something specifically on what I just covered, just feel free to type it in. Otherwise, we'll have a general Q&A session at the end. And so what I brought up here is the login page of the UGA. And the UGA is the Oweb online grant application. And so I want to just point out a couple of things before I dig in. But if you're a new grantee or you're interested in applying for Oweb and you haven't done so in the past, this is a great button here. You have to register first to get a username and password. And so you would click on this register button. It has additional information there, who to reach out to. We have a staff at Oweb, Leilani Sullivan, that can help you out. So kind of want to address that first. And then also, again, if you are a new grant applicant, this FAQ, or frequently asked questions tool, is very helpful. I'll take you to a page that can help you kind of get started. But folks who are seasoned applicants already kind of know that information. Also, another location here is our guidance document that we wrote. It's a standalone document that helps folks complete the application. And so the open solicitation or FIP guidance document is what you'd be interested in. Again, this is a standalone Word document. I really encourage you to download. It's version 3.4. You really want to make sure you have the current version. That's the most current version. We are constantly updating this and refining it to help you submit competitive applications. And so, again, if you're a new applicant, Chapter 1 is really helpful. It's an introduction and overview. And then for this training, you really want to focus on chapter 3, the monitoring application. And so there's information here to help you answer those questions. And that begins on page 21. So I just want to really encourage you guys to, I'm going to reference back to this later in my training. So I'm just kind of advancing some ready later on. And then templates. We have templates for our different types of applications. You can apply for 4 different types of activities for monitoring. It can be effectiveness monitoring of a restoration project, landscape scale EM, rapid bioassessment monitoring, and status and trend monitoring. And so if you are developing an application with a team, this could be a useful document that has all the questions in there that you guys can use to answer those questions, or send a certain section to a partner to complete the application, and then someone would be responsible for uploading that to the online application. You cannot submit the Word document as an official application, but it's a tool that you guys can use to not only shop it around to partners who are working with you, but also have sections reviewed, but also gives an ability to see all the questions in a Word document that are in the online application. Finally, the feedback button. The feedback button is really important because if you're experiencing any technical problems like bugs, or something's not working, or you're really struggling on how to answer a question, you can use this feedback to type in. It looks like Cyrus also appreciates compliments. So whoops. You can type in, anything you want and submit that. And that's really important just to know, because we have staff that get that feedback immediately and we can respond to you in a timely manner. Also, again, if there's any bugs or technical issues happening, we want to know right away so we can fix those. So your feedback is really helpful. And we have a team that after every application cycle, we review the feedback that came in, we figure out how to address it. If it's more systemic or applies to a specific application, can help us make improvements over time. So I really want to emphasize the importance of using the feedback. So after you have a username and login, you guys would use that. And so, because I'm not a real grantee, I have sort of my own test credentials. And so folks who are seasoned applicants know this page, but there's really 3 options. You can create a new application. You can look at some changes, and maybe this is unique to mine, but you'll see that you'll have either unfinished applications in your menu, applications that need editing, or a list of submitted applications and then funded applications. And so for the purposes of this training, I'm going to create a new application. Let's see here. So again, I'm going to choose as this. So let's see here. Just going to use that so I can help identify this in the future. And so I'm going to select monitoring. And so this is a new pop-up window that we have that as applicants, right when they click on creating a monitoring application, we're really encourage you guys to reach out to myself and the PM in your area. And again, if you need to that contact information, it's available there as well. And you don't need to do that before you start filling out the application, but it is helpful to do that in a timely manner. If someone asks, like, when should you do that? It's the sooner the better. And we've already had 4 or 5 calls with interested applicants already. And just don't wait till the last minute to the end of April, because it'll you'll just have less time to apply the feedback we give you. So, and also we're busy, and so we may not be able to schedule everybody's time to meet. So one thing I just want to mention is that this training will be more focused on the technical elements on the monitoring app and less on how to complete all elements of an application. I really encourage you to work with your RPR or Andrew for sections that I won't cover today. But basically, these are the main sections of the application. There's administrative information, problem statement, proposed solution, wrap up, and then there's the budget, funding and match, uploads, and a permit page. And so this is how these buttons are also how you navigate the application. You can also navigate using this drop-down menu up here as well. And so really what I want to emphasize here is for the administrative information section is the abstract, and really encourage folks to do that. Even though it's the first thing we ask you, I really encourage folks to do the abstract last after you answer all the questions, because it'll just help you create a more succinct section for folks. But this is what I was showing earlier, these I buttons that are, if there's a little blue lowercase I next to a question, this is additional guidance that can help you. And so, you know, this is the first place Oweb staff and technical reviewers look to understand the location and proposed activities. And so this is helpful for us. And it is important that you keep this really clear and concise. We'll need you to give us the a point on a map which best represents the proposed project's location, and that helps us understand which region you're in and if it overlaps with a FIP geography. If you are if your project is in a focused investment partnership geography and it's related to the restoration goals and objectives, you're unable to submit an application to the open solicitation. So that helps us sort of respond to applicants interested in areas that overlap with our FIP geographies. And you don't really need to worry about that too much, but that mapping that location really helps us in a variety of ways. This next section, it's important for us to understand the ownership of the project site. So really think that through. And something that we've been talking about, if it is on private land, you will either need to tell us at time of application whether or not you've contacted all the participating private landowners, and either if you have or you have not, and that's okay if you haven't, but you'll want to really think about when you're doing monitoring on private property that you're letting them know that the information you're collecting is part of the public record. And if it's part of, if it's water quality data, it will be submitted to DEQ. And, you know, DEQ is a regulatory agency, so that can at times make landowners nervous. And one of the things that we developed recently with Department of Ag, DEQ, and Department of Forestry was we put together a document that's helpful for folks to reach out to landowners. It's called Uses of Data, and it describes how state agencies use data that our grantees collect and how they use that into their decision-making process. And that's a tool that can be really helpful for our grantees. And just wanted to mention that if you're interested in that, contact myself or your RPRs and we can make that available.
Ken, related to the section you're in, there's a question of how should we address the location question when we have monitoring sites on both private and public property?
Yeah, you would think you are able to select both. And so you would just then answer those questions. So please mark both and provide that information. You know, we do ask for a little bit of information if you haven't contacted all the participating private landowners. Maybe you ran out of time or just you're not sure if you're going to get funded or not. You can sort of describe that here, which really is just marking both boxes. It's important to note that some monitoring projects require permits. And so if you are, say, handling threatened or endangered species, you might need a data collection permit from a state and or federal agency. And so really want you guys to think about that. Other instances where you may need a permit is if you want to attach monitoring equipment, say to a bridge. Sometimes you need permission from the person who maintains that bridge. And so those are some instances where I can think of immediately that require a permit. If you answer yes, just acknowledge that you're responsible for verifying all the applicable permits, licenses, and authorizations required for the project. And you can update that at grant agreement execution. But also if you know some permits you'll have to get, we have a permit page. You click on it there and complete that information. That helps us complete our final grant agreement that basically you are acknowledging that you'll get those permits, but also it's helpful for the review teams to see that as part of this project, you'll need some permits. And again, it certainly applies to if you're going to be working with threatened or endangered species. So I'm just going to toggle back to the administrative section, permits. The racial and ethnic impact statement, basically that I button there, the state law requires us to ask that. And so just really encourage you to think about your project and answer that question to the best of your ability based on who you'll be working with and the kind of data that you're collecting. The insurance information. When I looked at this, the only one that really applies to monitoring that I could think of is this one where you might be working with staff or volunteers and working with kids related to this project. Some of our monitoring grants have use school-age children to assist with collecting data as volunteers. And if that's the case, additional insurance is required. So certainly want you to answer that question properly. And then finally, if your project affects sage grouse or working in sage grouse areas, select that if that applies to you. So really the next section, this is how you turn the page there. So at the bottom, that's how I look at it, is turning the page so you can go back to administrative information or you can advance to proposed solution. One of the things that we really encourage you to do before you start getting into the technical elements of the application is to read all the questions before you begin to answer them. We ask a lot of questions and we really thought through on the questions we ask and that flow and order of those questions, and encourage you to look at all of those. One of the ways that you can do it for each section is to click on this box, view all questions and answers. That sort of expands the questions that we ask. And that will help you not only see the options that you can provide information, but it also helps you meter out that information. Basically, we have seen many applicants put way too much information in the questions at the beginning of the application that we're really not asking for. And then go on to poorly answer questions that are later on in the application. Don't do this. Just because there are questions at the end of the application does not mean they're less important. It just the order in which we chose, we thought that they would flow. And so really want you to think through and looking at all the questions before you start to write them to understand how we are asking for you to propose your project. And I think that will help you sort of meter out your information that you provide to us, and also helps avoid repetition. Although some repetition is helpful, it's not always needed. And it can be frustrating for the applicant because they feel like they already answered that question, but it's also could be frustrating for the reviewer who keeps reading the same answer over and over. So this first question is really just on the, what's the issue? And this links back to our the information need of our criteria. And so we're asking for you to provide an overview of the present situation, specific problem, and or watershed issue that this monitoring is intended to inform. And so we have an I button here that gives you a little more guidance. And, we're asking you, please don't describe the monitoring project you're proposing in this application. You'll have the opportunity to describe your project in the following sections. Focus on the situation, problem, or watershed issue. If you're proposing to do some effectiveness monitoring, it's a good time to include the discussion of the restoration and monitoring history to provide context for the project. But there's other opportunities later in the application to describe that. These strategies links back to the information need and how it links back to either an existing plan or an assessment or the development of one. So that's sort of a criteria number 2. And so we want to know, what's your strategy? Why are you collecting this data? And so we want to know, is this, I'm just going to link this back just to the specific question, not see all the answers. So, is the monitoring or data need identified as an essential or needed action in the local assessment or plan at the proposed location? And if that's the case, provide the name of the local plan. You can also answer this too. You could say, we're wondering, will the project develop a monitoring plan, QA documents, or monitoring protocols as part of the monitoring activities you are proposing? And again, if that's the case, let us know what you're going to be creating, what document you're going to be creating, and a brief description of its scope and extent. And then if none of those apply, the project you're working on has not already been identified in a local assessment or plan, or you don't plan to develop one, you would select none of these activities. And because a lot of people are proposing efforts that have not yet been documented by a plan or strategy. And if that is the case, it gives you an opportunity to sort of just briefly describe what that plan or strategy is, including organizations that you're working with. But if there's no plans, you don't plan to write one, and you don't already have an existing strategy that's not been documented, we're really wondering then, well, what's the strategy and why are you proposing this? So it's a catch-all there for us to understand why this monitoring is being proposed. And that helps us understand sort of the information need and how it links to existing or developing a plan. These next 2 questions around a comprehensive monitoring strategy or program are questions that we report to NOAA. We do get funding from NOAA. We report a lot of our monitoring funds as matched to them. And we fund the majority of our monitoring with lottery dollars, but we do report to salmon related projects to NOAA for these 2 questions. And they're really wanting to know, is this project we're funding part of a large scale or comprehensive monitoring effort conducted by multiple entities? And so if that's the case, you would know and you would say yes. And then we want that to be the name of it and a specific EndNote citation format that NOAA requires that. And again, clicking on the I button tells you how to provide that citation. And then basically, if you are doing that, who are you cooperating with? And so are other organizations, entities cooperating with this comprehensive project? Yes or no? And if so, how many? And list the organization entities. When you're trying to answer this question, we want to know who you're partnering with that's not receiving funding from Oweb to implement this project. And so if you're collecting some data, say it's water quality, and you're partnering with ODF&W, they're collecting some fish data, then ODF&W would be that organization that you're cooperating with that are not being funded out of this grant. Just because you're cooperating with folks on this project and they're all being funded by Oweb, you would answer that question no. So this next area where we did add some guidance around is project history. And this is around continuing projects. So a lot of the projects that we fund for monitoring are what we call continuations. And so, answer this yes if you received Oweb funds on a monitoring project that this is related to. And so we want to know why you're seeking additional funds to address new information, or if you want to continue the monitoring project. So if it is yes, and we ask some specific information around that, the grant numbers, what you've completed with previous Oweb grants, and basically why additional Oweb funding is needed. Some new guidance that we added here is that for applicants who are proposing long-term repeat monitoring, you're required to describe the ongoing need for this data and how results are being applied or will be applied to inform on the ground work. Sometimes we see projects that we've been funding for many years, and the review teams are trying to understand, do we really need to continue to fund this, or have we learned what we need to, and there's less of a need to keep collecting this data. So it's really important to answer that question properly. This is a new question here. Have you submitted but were not awarded an Oweb application for this project before? Yes or no? And if so, please provide that application number. The part that's new now is a section that allows you to provide a response to comments. And this applies to all of our application types: restoration, TA, stakeholder engagement, and monitoring. And so if you weren't funded, you'll want to look at that evaluation for this application number and then indicate which sections where the new application you're submitting addressed the review team comments and concerns identified in the Oweb evaluation. And so say there were some comments talking about how you are going to analyze and manage your data. That's in the wrap-up section. And then you can in here succinctly, right, 500 character limit, just say you guys had comments around this question, around how I was going to manage and analyze the data. I added new language here that addressed this, and kind of briefly lay out how you address comments. And this can be a really helpful way to help the reviewers target new information. A lot of the reviewers are the same reviewers year to year, and they remember your application, and they're going to want to see how you were able to address their comments. So that's a new element that was added by our developers. We also ask, is your project phased? Some folks develop their monitoring project in phases. And so there's no requirement to do that. But again, someone had asked about like how much time how many years out can we ask for Oweb monitoring dollars? And one way to break that up is by phases. And so, if you are proposing a project that is part of a comprehensive plan that has not been purposely developed in phases, the answer no. There's no requirement to develop and implement a monitoring plan or project in phases. But if that's how you've done it, how you plan to do it, or now this is phase 2, right? You can describe, well, phase 1, this is what we did. Use this tool to develop that. Phase 2 is what we're proposing, and then phase 3, we envision doing this later on. That really helps a reviewer understand how you're thinking about implementing this project over time. Again, we have additional questions that Noah wants to know around if this project will benefit salmon or steelhead. If it is, you'll know. And then answer yes, and then which species are you focusing on? And then specific geographic region. And then how will the monitoring project benefit salmon or steelhead or their habitat? And this is one of the areas where we don't have an I button, but we give some guidance in that Word document that I was showing you guys earlier in the online application guidance. And so it's a great tool to use, sort of have open as you're going through, and you might have questions on how to answer a question. Not only refer to the I button, but really encourage you to look at this guidance document. And I'm just going to scroll down really quick to plans and salmon. Basically, you can see and explain the benefits to salmon or steelhead or their habitat. Indicate how the proposed monitoring would address limiting factors for the selected salmon and steelhead. So really wanted to encourage you guys to also have that as a tool open as you're proceeding through the application. And then this again gets to the regional, the need. So again, if you're working on salmon and steelhead, we're gonna ask if this proposed project has been identified in an existing regional assessment or recovery plan at the proposed location. Normally, they do exist, and really encourage you before you just say no to really consider answering that yes. And here's a drop-down menu of the majority of the recovery plans that we have available. So after you provide this information, is really again around problem statement, issue strategies, project history, and how it relates to salmon, you would collect proposed solution. And here is where we have 4 different monitoring activities that are eligible for a monitoring application, but you can only choose one. And so you want to select the one that best fits your project. We have status and trend, effectiveness monitoring of a restoration project, landscape scale EM, and rapid bioassessment monitoring. And you can read these definitions as I talk through this a little bit, but really when we went to online applications, we limited your ability to only apply one or complete one application at a time for each activity. In the past, people were proposing status and trend of a different area, and then also in the application talk about effectiveness monitoring of a restoration project that they've been working on, and that became really complicated application for them to propose and hard to review. And so if you have multiple monitoring efforts going on, one sort of status and trend monitoring and another one is effectiveness monitoring, we just ask that you propose those in 2 separate applications. And so really want to emphasize that. And what you'll see here is if you try to do sort of both, you can only do one. And we have that guidance here. Applicants must fill out a separate application for each monitoring type. Again, if you have questions on that, the consultation calls are really helpful for that. Goals, objectives, and activities. This is where we made a change to include so again, include your project goal and a goal statement, and then describe your objective, and then state the monitoring question you intend to answer for each objective. Added some new guidance here. Really want your objectives to be specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. But you also must define the specific monitoring question of this project that you hope to answer. But some objectives may not require a monitoring question, such as objectives to develop a monitoring plan, or you might have an objective to write the final report. Obviously, a monitoring question is not needed there, but as you begin to develop your goals, objectives, and questions, we see those as all fitting together, and your ability to clearly describe those are going to be very helpful. Then the next question is to describe the project activities for each objective, and activity explain how the objective will be implemented. And we've seen a wide range of people taking an approach to describe those activities, and really just encourage you to keep this succinct to your objective. What are the key components to achieve this objective? This helps Oweb and review team members understand how you're thinking about the project, both on what the main objectives are to achieve your goal, but also the specific activities to accomplish each objective. And these activities describe the pathway you plan to take and the necessary steps to complete the objective. And so think about it as say you're making, it's the recipe, and the ingredients to make soup. Think about all the steps and how you describe that. In this activity section, please don't describe your data collection methods or analyses you plan to perform. Also, don't tell us how you plan to use the information. We ask specific questions later in the application that will allow you to provide that information. And that's, again, we've seen a lot of people give us everything in their activities, and it's really not necessary because we ask you questions later on to give us that information in greater detail. So I'm gonna pause there to see if there's any questions. Looking, we got about 30 minutes. After this, we do start really getting in the details of the project. And so Liz, didn't know if there's any questions that have come up. Again, we'll have time later on, but I thought this might be a good opportunity to just pause for a second.
Yeah, we have two questions in chat. One is related to the section of the application where you select whether it benefits listed species. The question is, can you select yes for benefiting the listed species if you are working in a non-fish bearing stream, but know that your site contains upriver benefits to those species?
So real quick, I'm gonna go back. This is around the, will this project benefit salmon or steelhead? Is that right?
I think it is. Do you want me to reread the question?
Yeah, thanks.
Okay. Can you select yes for benefiting the listed species if you are working in a non-fish bearing stream, but know that your site contains upriver benefits to those species?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, again, it's an opportunity for you to describe how, right? So we give that to you. How will the resulting monitoring project benefit salmon or steelhead or their habitat? And so if you can connect the dots and describe that, that's your opportunity to do so, even if you're working, upstream of where fish are present.
Great. The other question I think might be match related. It's, would good neighbor funds be considered Oweb funds, even though it came from BLM? Do you want me to answer this, Ken?
Yeah, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. I think if the question is, can you use those good neighbor funds that are coming through an Oweb grant agreement as match to Oweb funds? It is my understanding that you can, but we should check on that to make sure that that is true. So I would suggest contacting your regional program representative and follow up to make sure that we answered that question correctly.
Yeah, thanks. And we really won't get into a match today, and so appreciate you asking that and sort of flagging that for us, because sort of relatively new thing. So after you describe your goals, objectives, monitoring questions, and activities, you then tell us what habitat types you're proposing to work in, and we have definitions for each of those. If you're wondering, you know, and it can be more than one. You can be working in obviously riparian and in-stream. One of the things that just for this training, I chose effectiveness monitoring or restoration projects. There's some specific questions. I had heard a question come up earlier in the training around this. So just know that what you pick, there are a few unique questions to each monitoring activity type based on what you're proposing. And so that sits here. I chose project scale effectiveness monitoring. So now I have these specific questions around project effectiveness that I should answer first before going to wrap up. So this is sort of a new page that's been inserted. And basically, this is your opportunity to select all activities you'll be implementing for the effectiveness monitoring of a restoration project. So this is how we have it organized. You know, if you're doing water quality, there's additional drop-down questions to select. Again, keep it what you're selecting here. Select what you're asking us to fund or that is connected to the project as match. If it's a bigger scale project where others are without this funding and not matching, you know, they're doing other biological monitoring or the fish monitoring, and you're just focused on water quality, don't include that, because this helps us in our metrics and our reporting to understand really what we're funding, but also what we're expecting you to report at the end of the grant. So after you tell us, you know, sort of the parameters, if you will, of what you're going to collect, we start to ask about the study design and the monitoring methods. And so we have refined the guidance and the language for these questions to help solicit the responses we're looking for. And so this next question really is allowing you to tell us how you are choosing the sampling locations, the parameters, and frequency, and how this design will address the project monitoring questions. And so it's important for you to explain why you've chosen those locations, the parameters you are monitoring, and the frequency of data collection. This is going to help a reviewer understand the specific approach to collect data to answer your monitoring questions and inform future actions. So really encourage you to put that time in. You know, it's an 8,000 character limit, so you can write a lot more in these answers. And really, to me, this is one of the key questions. After your goal, objectives, and activities, these next two questions are really helpful for me to understand what you're proposing to do, how to collect the data. And so this next one is describe in detail the monitoring methods that will be followed and provide the citation for the protocols that will be used. This is a question that we see a wide range of responses to. And really what we're looking for is sufficient detail of the methods and protocols should be provided to demonstrate to reviewers that there is a firm understanding how the data will be collected for quality assurance and quality control. If you are using an established method or protocol, you know, please include reference and location of where they are available on the internet. do not simply upload the protocol or report to the application and reference the attached document. We want to see you describe those methods. It's okay to upload or provide the link to the protocol, so if folks want to look at it closer, they can. But really think carefully if you are going to be uploading something. Don't upload a 500-page document because the reviewers aren't going to have time to go through all that. If you have a couple pages that describe your methods, or have a table that describes the different parameters that you're collecting, and sort of want to provide a citation for that, that's really a good way to organize information and upload. But we still want to make sure you're providing a narrative response to each of these questions. So then we have a new section. This just used to be the information micro section, we call these, but we add information engagement now. And so someone had asked earlier, again, this is project scale, effectiveness monitoring activity type in the application. So will the monitoring activities proposed in this application consist of gathering baseline data prior to a restoration project being implemented? And if that's the case, that's okay, it's totally eligible. You would say yes, and then just provide a description of the future restoration projects you are proposing to monitor. So again, this is helpful to see this question here. You can provide a lot more detail here. You might provide a little bit of background in the problem statement, but this is your opportunity here to get a lot more detail on the future restoration project you are proposing to monitor. But if that's not the case, you might be monitoring activities proposed in this application that gather data about a restoration project that's also proposed this cycle, or the restorations in progress or previously implemented. And if that's the case, say yes. If it was funded by Oweb, provide the grant number for that restoration grant, and then provide a description of the restoration project to be monitored. You might be in a situation where you're saying yes to this, and it's also a non-Oweb project. In that case, you would have a little bit of repetition. I just want to acknowledge that the same description of the restoration project to be monitored, you would just copy paste that here. There's unique situations where it's in progress or previously implemented, but it's also a non-Oweb project. We kind of want to know a little bit more information, who's the main project funder and the year the project was implemented. But that's sort of a catch-all for us to understand sort of 3 different scenarios in which restoration monitoring will occur, and how you can describe those restoration actions. These 2 new questions are a direct result of the new rules. The first one, how does this project complement relevant existing data and current or planned monitoring efforts? And so we have some guidance here for you. This is the one that we also encourage you to describe how this project will build on any existing data, historical data, and indigenous knowledge. Indigenous knowledge is also known as traditional ecological knowledge, or TEK. And if you're incorporating indigenous knowledge into your monitoring project, describe the context that you'll be using this information in developing and implementing your monitoring project. And again, there's 2 parts of this question. Also describe how the proposed monitoring project will build on any current and or planned monitoring efforts. The review teams want to understand why new data collection is necessary and how proposed monitoring will leverage current or planned monitoring efforts. If there are no existing data, planned or current monitoring efforts, describe how you determine this. And finally, that last question, describe how the appropriate technical experts and community stakeholders are engaged. So again, there's 2 sort of elements of that question. There's the technical experts that you might be working with to help collect and analyze the data. And then there's the community stakeholders, which would be those that would benefit from the information you collect and that would apply it potentially, or would want to know about the information that you learned, including landowners or municipalities that could actually take action on the information to do something with it. So we ask that you identify the technical experts and community stakeholders who may have a role in the proposed project, from planning, the monitoring, all the way through using the information to make decisions in the future. List those technical experts you are working with or plan to work with and why they are relevant to the proposed project, and describe their role in the proposed project. Additionally, identify the community stakeholders you are working with or plan to work with, why they are relevant, and describe their role. And so, we understand that you may not have engaged all the experts and community stakeholders because you want to wait to see if it's funded, and that's okay. Just describe, who and what you would and how you would engage those people if you are funded. One of the things that actually I'm going to go back really quick. It's a good opportunity to talk about sort of those community stakeholders. And if you have engaged them in technical experts that are in support of your project, that find value in the data that you would be collecting and the information you would produce, you can upload letters of support that describe that. It can be sort of from those people who find value in the project and lend support. It can be either lending support through a variety of ways, and they can describe that in the letters of support. And so I just want to encourage folks to consider that. They're not required. You can certainly describe that here, but you can reinforce it more by uploading a letter of support from partners that are interested in your project. And I might just pause there, Liz, to see if you have anything to add to that element of letters of support.
Yeah, thanks. Letters of support are highly encouraged because they really can help tell that project story of who's involved, especially when you're talking about how the data is going to be used, who needs the data. Having those letters of support help fill in some of that project story that can be very valuable in the review process.
Thank you, Liz. So I got about 10 more minutes of what I want to cover, and then we'll have about 10 minutes for Q&A. And so I really appreciate folks' questions and getting going. But I might just ask that we hold any that might come in, Liz, for the end, so I can work through these next few sections. So now we're in wrap up, and even though we call it wrap up, there's still some really key information that needs to be included here. One of the things for reporting helps us sort of with our broad scale metrics is the total number of stream miles and or acres that will be monitored under this application. This again is information that we report to know if it's fish or salmon or steelhead related. And then we just ask that you provide a short description on how you calculated totals for stream miles or total acres monitored. There's some guidance here helping you avoid any double counting. So I encourage you to look at that. Again, there's no right or wrong way on how you estimate that, but just want to have you include a description of how you did that. This next section we have here is related to quality assurance, quality control, and again, that's linked to in our rules. And so we ask, if necessary, do you have an EPA or Oregon Department of Environmental Quality or ODEQ approved quality assurance project plan or sampling and analysis plan? And so we provide a little bit more guidance here. Projects related to water quality require a QAP or SAP to be approved by EPA or DEQ, and that water quality data must be submitted to DEQ at the end of the project. For more information, there's a website, or there's that link to that training that we have on our monitoring webpage to learn more information. And so if you say yes there, we just ask you that you provide the reference and briefly describe the QAQ procedures that you'll use to follow to collect high quality data. If you don't have one, you would say no. And then you can describe how you plan to incorporate QA/QC measures into your monitoring and data management approach and practices. And if it's water quality related, then we're gonna want to hear from you, your effort to describe your plan to write a SAP with DEQ approval because it's required. And that's important. We're trying to get that information out through these different guidances, the trainings that we've done, so that people know that it takes time to write a SAP or QAF for water quality related projects, and that you can build those expenses and time into your project, and Oweb will pay for those expenses. If you think it doesn't apply to you, we still want to know how you plan to incorporate QA/QC measures into your monitoring and data management approach and practices. And so, again, if you're not doing water quality, you're doing vegetation monitoring. You still have usually with methods and protocols, steps that you're taking to ensure that you're collecting high quality data. We want to hear about how that is done. Examples are, quality assurance is making sure you have trained staff, and they again, if you're doing vegetation monitoring, you have a dichotomous key to help identify species, or you're working with an expert to help confirm identifications of plants that you're less familiar with, or with grasses that are sometimes hard to identify. So that's just one example of quality assurance measures for vegetation that we'll want to see described in the application. Project management, this is a table that you can complete to list the key individuals, their roles and qualifications relevant for monitoring implementation. So the folks that you have here should match later on your budget table that you're asking for funding to pay for, but also for those that are going to provide match, or those technical experts that are providing expertise to assist you. After you have completed project management table, describe all the key individuals, their roles and qualifications relevant, we have these last 4 questions that are really centered around data. And this one is specifically linked to allows you to expand on the project management table to describe the experience of the technical staff and or contractors who will be directly conducting the monitoring. We want you to include experience successfully applying monitoring approaches and collecting and analyzing data as it relates to the proposed monitoring work. And so really want it to link to the past project that they've worked on. So for example, if you have a contractor working on analyzing fish data, then tell us about their successful projects where they have done similar analyses, the documents that were produced. Or if you're asking for someone to help you collect physical habitat data, then really talk to us about their experience collecting habitat data. So we want to understand experience doing that specific work that you are asking them to do for this project. Finally, and this one's important, we actually, these 2 questions used to be rolled into one, and we broke them out into 2 to help get folks to provide that detail that we're looking for. So this question here is really just focused on how the data is going to be managed, analyzed, and interpreted. And we want to understand the steps and software tools used to manage and analyze the data to answer the monitoring question posed in the application. So what do you do with the data when you get it back from the field? Do you photocopy your logbook and then stick it in a paper file and then hand enter it into Excel spreadsheet? Or do you have field tablets that you have data forms entered into, and then you upload it by connecting USB cord to your computer, and then it just uploads it to a database? Really want to understand how that data is managed, but then also how it's analyzed. what are the summary metrics that you're going to be calculating? What are the statistical analyses that you're going to be completing to answer your monitoring questions? And then again, how will that data be interpreted? Will you determine if there are any exceedances of thresholds that have been established, or linking back to, say, water quality standards that might exist? And so really want to understand how that data, what's going to happen to that data once you're back in the office to help answer your monitoring questions. Now that's different from how the data will be stored, reported, and made available to natural resource professionals. And so, again, we want to know how the data is stored, like long-term, short-term and long-term storage are both relevant to talk about here. Is all the data stored on a local PC in your office, which would tell us that that data is vulnerable to being lost if you have any damage to that equipment? Or do you pay for services to store the data in a cloud? It's also on a local PC, but it's in a cloud. Or do you also upload that data to other long-term data repositories to make it available? There's a lot of resources out there for data archiving and data repositories. And if you're interested in that, we have some information on that. Also, PNAMP had a webinar last week on data archiving, data management, that I encourage you to look at. That those training webinars are available on PNAMP's webpage, but also contact me for more information. Finally, that question around made available to natural resource professionals and the public. We had a question on that earlier. There's a variety of ways that we've seen people propose that in the past. Again, the reported, it's important for you to talk about that you'll be developing a final technical report and submitting that to Oweb, and that you have resources in your budget to complete that. But also that, how are you going to make that available? Are you going to, say, present to the local watershed council and the SWCDs to let them know about what you've learned? Or you might be putting that on your website, but you're also going to go to the relevant conference and participate in a poster session to promote this information. There's a variety of ways that you can make this information available to natural resource professionals and the public. And we'll want to see that discussed. There's no magic mix that we're looking for, but we want to see, depending on the audience that you think is important, who will value from this information, and how you're going to make that available to them, but also the public. And as we talked about, certain data is required to be reported to certain state agencies depending on that data. And again, if you're not sure, it's helpful to contact us in advance. We can help you with that. And finally, this last question is at the last, but also is linked back to the first criteria in our revised rules, which is, how will this data be applied to inform future planning, implementation, or adaptive management of restoration or acquisition projects? And so we try to provide some guidance here to really encourage you to talk about immediate next steps and tangible outcomes over the longer process of adaptive management for the relevant monitoring, restoration, and or acquisition projects. And you can talk about if it's not you that's applying that data, but you have a vision of you'll collect the data and feed it to other person to apply it to incorporate future planning, implementation, or adaptive management. Just describe that, but talk to us about who that is. And it does help to have those letters of support describing who that is. And so I'm not going to get into budget, but one of the things that was added real quick is now that budget development section that basically encourages and requires you to provide a narrative description of how your budget was developed. And it gives you an opportunity to explain how project costs and our rates were determined. It also helps address any maybe really expensive budget line items that you could say were unique to your situation or your setting or geographical area that you can describe how those costs were estimated for the budget. Other sections of the application, funding and match, are required, but really aren't the focus of this training today. So I encourage you to work with your project manager or RPR to help figure that out if you need some assistance. And so with that, I know I've covered a lot, but we have about 6 minutes, and I wanted to really include this for folks to ask some questions if you have any, and can be specific to your situation or to any of the content that I just covered.
Thanks. Can we have, so far I have one question that queued up in the last section that was around the time you were talking about quality control and assurance.
Okay.
The question is, does water temperature data need to be considered under the ODEQ reporting requirements?
Yeah, great question. So yeah, so if you're collecting water temperature data, that is water quality related, and so it will require to be submitted to DEQ. And before it's submitted, you'll need to have an EPA approved sampling and analysis plan. And really the guidance that we have for folks is to, after you get funded from Oweb, is to contact Nick Haxton Evans. We have that contact information. Basically the website link in our grant agreement, but it's also provided here, this link here. You can find out more information, but really the idea there, the emphasis is to work with DEQ early in the process. They have a template. They have specific methods that they recommend if you're don't have a already existing protocol, and really want to make sure folks are collecting that data appropriately and have all the QA/QC that's required to submit with your water temperature data at the end of the project for them to be able to use for their decision making, but also meet your goals and objectives. And if there are certain QA/QC measures that aren't provided with your data, they're unable to upload it to their database, or they downgrade it to lower quality, sort of unknown status, and they're unable to use it. So the whole intent is for us to be having your data meet your goals and objectives, but also, since we're funding this with state resources, we want other state agencies that are responsible for water quality to be able to benefit from that investment for their decision making as well.
We have a couple more questions. Another budget related question. What sort of monitoring gear purchase is authorized?
Yeah, so I think it's all authorized. And again, this will be a good question to follow up with your RPR and I to dig into in greater detail, but we really encourage you to, so there's a section, there's materials and supplies, and then there's equipment. And so we define equipment as equipment greater than $2,500, and materials and supplies are less than that. We also have a budget category definition document on our webpage that's available that kind of describes the different eligible expenses that are available. And that document was just updated, I believe, in December of last year. So it's very current and a great resource. Actually, the title of it's Go Big. And so you can just go to our homepage and in the search menu, type Go Big, and you can find that, and really encourage you to look at that. And that's helpful to have as a sort of a resource as you're completing your budget table.
Great. Thanks, Ken. And I would just add, I was going to suggest the Go Big, but also just remember the valuation criteria. One of them is cost effectiveness, and the description is that your costs are necessary for the work that you proposed. It says something like that. So that's that question that Ken pointed out about a place to provide a narrative about how you constructed your budget. That's a good place. There it is down there. That's a good place to make any kind of explanations why you need certain things. But again, the threshold that we're looking for is that it's reasonable and necessary for the proposed work. So we have a couple more questions coming in. So how are we expected to fund grant writing time? Can it be written into a grant for future grant?
I'll let Liz answer that one.
Yeah, I knew you were going to pass that to me. Unfortunately, we cannot fund any kind of work that happened prior to a grant award, and so that's one of the, we know that's one of the challenging expenses out there. But as Ken mentioned, some of those things that happen before a grant application can be matched if it's directly related to the work that you're proposing. So we do not have a tool or vehicle for backcasting prior to a grant award and paying for expenses that occurred prior to that. The second part of the question, can it be written into a future grant? Again, it kind of depends on how you put it together. You would have to make the case that somehow it's connected to that future grant proposal, that the work you did is connected to that future, the work in that future grant proposal. And so I don't think I know of an example where anyone has done that to be able to provide an example, but it's all about, I just want to emphasize, it's all about you're connecting whatever that is to the proposed work and the grant that you're trying to get. And I do encourage, if you have further questions, to follow up with your regional program representative for more information. So we have another question on the budget page. Is the budget broken down by years, or is it all just one sum?
Yeah, it's combined. And so you can do that in different ways though, because as you break it down, you can provide that detail. You can do it, say, salary, wages, and benefits is this first section here. You can break it down by year. You'll have more detail on your table. I've seen people lay it out that way, but also usually it's lump sum. So it's by the position. So it's, the monitoring coordinator is going to work, 75, hours, and they get paid $25 an hour. And actually that's unit cost. So the unit would be the monitoring coordinator. Sorry. So I hope that helps. And then of course you would have, ask here how much you're asking for Oweb, how much is cash match or in kind, and that's how that helps develop that. But I really encourage you to play around with this in advance, and then if you have specific questions, follow up with us to figure that out, because there's a lot of detail in developing a budget and including your funding and match documentation that wouldn't want you to underestimate as you're trying to complete an application before the time, before the due date. Yeah, it's not going to let me do that.
I'm not seeing any new questions, and I'm not seeing any hand raises at this point.
Well, we covered a lot of information. I know we're a couple minutes over, and so I want to be respectful of everybody's time and just really thank everybody for attending and asking questions along the way. I think it was really helpful. I know a lot of detail that I may not have covered, but I think that's a great opportunity for you to reach out to me and your RPR or project manager to help have a more focused conversation on your proposed project. And so look forward to hearing from you. And thanks, Liz, for all your help.
Great. Thank you, Ken.
So with that, I think I'm gonna sign off, and we are going to be posting a recording on our website